Along the silent curve of the Nile, where desert stone meets black fertile earth, a river breathes like a living memory beneath the stars. Traveller, you did not arrive here by accident. For more than 3,000 years, a civilization aligned its temples, its kings, and its afterlife to rhythms older than history itself. What if these myths were not just stories, but reflections of patterns written into nature and time? The odds that the Nile would flood with near-perfect regularity, sustaining one of humanity's longest civilizations, are vanishingly small. Yet it happened again and again, like a cosmic heartbeat. Above it all, stars traced eternal paths while gods were born, died, and returned. Listen closely. Let's drift a little deeper. A faint ribbon of light slides across the Nile Valley, as it has for thousands of years, touching stone, water, and sand with the same indifferent precision. Long before names were given to gods or stars, this landscape taught a lesson that never needed words. Order does not arrive once and remain forever. It must return again and again, fragile and contested. Egyptian mythology was not born from fantasy, but from this daily observation of a universe that repeatedly rebuilds itself from the edge of dissolution. Traveller, you're not here by chance. Civilizations do not endure for 3 millennia without learning how close stability sits to collapse. Along this narrow strip of fertile land, surrounded by absolute desert, the Egyptians lived inside a natural experiment in balance. Too much water erased fields and memory. Too little water ended dynasties. Survival required attention, patience, and humility before forces larger than kings. Myth became their way of recording those forces when numbers were not yet enough. I imagine the early observers standing at the riverbank watching the flood arrive with near-perfect timing year after year. Today we might speak of orbital mechanics, monsoon cycles, and solar-driven climate patterns. To them it was the visible pulse of a living cosmos. The Nile did not simply rise, it remembered. Gravity itself felt like memory, pulling water back toward the same rhythms. Erosion was time thinking, slowly reshaping the land with infinite restraint. In modern laboratories, we listen to similar stories told in different languages. Radiation whispers of ancient catastrophes. Isotopes remember suns that died before Earth existed. Light arrives carrying information older than life itself. Egyptian mythology emerged from the same impulse, the sense that the universe stores its past and leaks it forward, quietly, patiently, for those who know how to watch. The Egyptians called the beginning none a dark, infinite ocean, without shape or boundary, not emptiness, but undifferentiated potential. Modern cosmology describes something uncannily similar. A universe before structure, before matter stabilized, before time behaved predictably. Order did not appear because chaos ended. It appeared because chaos cooled, slowed, and briefly allowed patterns to hold. Creation was not a miracle, it was a temporary arrangement. This understanding shaped everything that followed. The sun did not rise because it was guaranteed. It rose because something resisted entropy through effort. Each dawn represented a victory that had to be won again. In myth, this struggle became a nightly battle beneath the horizon. In physics, we call it energy expenditure against decay. Different symbols, same truth. Nothing lasts without maintenance. Observe and notice how Egyptian myths never promise final triumph. Chaos is not defeated, it is postponed. Even the gods grow weary. Even the sun god ages. This is not pessimism. It is realism softened into ritual made survivable through story. The universe does not offer permanence. It offers repetition if balance is respected. Temples in this light were not houses of belief. They were instruments. Daily rituals were calibrations aligning speech movement and intention with cosmic cycles. Offerings were not bribes but acknowledgements of dependence. Words spoken at dawn functioned like adjustments made to fragile systems, ensuring that order held for one more day. I think of nights spent alone with instruments humming softly, data scrolling without drama dust settling on old charts. Precision never removes mystery, it sharpens it. Egyptian mythology was born from sustained attention, from watching stars that never set, from watching bodies decay while patterns endured, from recognizing that even divine systems require upkeep. Creation in their worldview was not a completed act. It was an ongoing process that could fail. That failure had a name: chaos. And chaos was not evil. It was simply what happens when effort stops. The land itself reinforced this lesson. Beyond the green strip of the Nile lay desert that erased footprints within hours. Memory survived only where water returned. This geography trained a civilization to think in cycles, not progress. The past was not behind them. It was the standard against which all futures were measured. When myths spoke of a perfect first time, they were not longing for paradise. They were remembering alignment. Listener, there is a quiet weight in this perspective, comforting but demanding. The universe does not save you. It responds to you. Human action mattered because it altered balance. Speech mattered because words were seen as forces, not labels. Silence itself carried power. Silence was the universe thinking. Even death was not an ending. It was a transition into another system of maintenance. The afterlife required preparation, knowledge, and continued participation. Eternity was not rest. It was repetition without collapse, a field to be tended forever, not a void to escape into. This was not denial of mortality. It was acceptance shaped into structure. I have stood among ruins at night, wind passing through stones placed by hands no one remembers. Instruments still record long after their operators are gone. Egyptian builders understood this instinctively. They built for futures without witnesses. Their myths were not written to entertain. They were written to endure conditions that erase memory. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. Patterns repeat. Cycles persist. Collapse waits patiently for inattention. Egyptian mythology survives because it does not pretend otherwise. It does not promise safety. It offers alignment. And in the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand. Some mysteries are not invitations to solve, but reminders to observe. Tonight the universe whispers again. You are not lost in space. You are part of it. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. At first, the evidence does not announce itself. It accumulates quietly like sediment at the bottom of a slow river, each layer thin enough to ignore on its own, yet impossible to dismiss once the weight becomes undeniable. Egyptian mythology presents itself this way, not as a single revelation but as a long record of observation, preserved in stone alignment, repetition, and silence. What survives is not belief, but pattern. Traveller. The monuments are often treated as symbols, but symbols alone do not require such precision. The pyramids are not only tombs, they are measurements fixed in stone. Their angles echo astronomical ratios. Their orientations align with cardinal directions to a degree that modern instruments still find unsettling. This was not ornament, this was calibration, a civilization anchoring itself to a sky it trusted more than kings. When archaeologists brush sand from foundations, they uncover more than architecture. They reveal consistency across centuries. Temples rebuilt on the same footprints. Sanctuaries aligned to solstices long after the original builders were forgotten. Such persistence is not cultural inertia. It is data preservation. Like running an experiment to confirm its outcome, Egypt rebuilt the same alignments again and again, ensuring the pattern did not drift. I think of long nights spent reviewing charts where nothing dramatic happens. No sudden spike, no revelation, just the same signal repeating within expected margins. That repetition is the evidence. Egyptian myth behaves the same way. Creation stories vary, names change, gods merge and separate, yet the structure remains intact. A universe born from chaos, order requiring maintenance, collapse waiting at the edges. These are not decorative ideas. They are conclusions drawn from sustained observation. The Nile itself was the primary instrument. Its flood timing was astonishingly stable across millennia, driven by orbital mechanics and distant monsoons beyond human sight. The Egyptians did not know the equations, but they knew the reliability. When a system behaves predictably for thousands of years, it becomes sacred. Myth forms around statistical stability long before science names it. Observer consider the mythic insistence that the sun must be defended every night. This is not superstition. It is a recognition of entropy. The sun sets. Darkness arrives. Every system trends toward breakdown unless energy intervenes. Today we describe this through thermodynamics. They described it through serpents and boats beneath the horizon. The language differs. The evidence does not. Written records reinforce this worldview. The pyramid texts are not stories meant to be read for pleasure. They are operational instructions, coordinates for the soul, procedures for transformation. Spells are not metaphors, they are protocols. Each phrase assumes the universe responds to precise input. Words spoken correctly alter outcomes. This is not naive thinking. It mirrors how equations function. Properly formed symbols produce predictable results. Even the afterlife judgment reflects evidence-based logic. The heart is weighed, not guessed. Balance determines outcome. There is no forgiveness through emotion alone. Only alignment matters. Ethics in this system are not moral abstractions. They are stabilizing forces. Society that disrupts balance collapses. Egyptian mythology encodes this as cosmic law because lived history confirmed it repeatedly. Geology supports the anxiety beneath the myths. Egypt experienced environmental fluctuations that erased earlier cultures. Sand swallowed settlements. Shifting river channels abandoned cities. The land carried scars of resets long before writing existed. Myth preserved the memory of those losses. When stories speak of earlier ages ruled by gods, they may reflect epochs beyond historical recall, compressed into symbolic form. Not fantasy, but erosion of memory into archetype. Listener myths often preserve what data cannot. Where writing fails, repetition survives. Annual festivals reenacted floods, deaths, resurrections. These rituals were not nostalgia. They were reminders that stability is conditional, that what returns can also fail to return. I imagined scribes copying text by lamplight, aware that accuracy mattered. A miswritten name could destabilize meaning. A wrong alignment could invite failure. This was not religious anxiety. It was systems thinking without modern language. They understood feedback long before equations described it. Astronomy deepened this awareness. The circumpolar stars that never set became symbols of permanence because they demonstrated it. Everything else moved, rose, and vanished. These stars remained. Evidence shaped theology, not the other way around. Immortality was modelled on observed celestial behaviour, not wishful thinking. Even artistic conventions served evidentiary roles. Gods depicted in profile with frontal eyes, bodies frozen in impossible poses, were not stylistic accidents. They represented idealized states, not moments, like diagrams rather than portraits. Egyptian art is schematic, not expressive, because it aimed to preserve information, not emotion. Some evidence lies in absence. Despite vast construction, Egypt avoided unnecessary variation. Change was treated with suspicion. When systems work, you do not redesign them impulsively. You maintain them. This conservatism was adaptive, not stagnant. It allowed continuity across invasions, dynastic collapse, and environmental stress. In modern science, we respect models that survive repeated testing. Egyptian mythology functioned as such a model. It predicted instability. It warned of imbalance. It explained renewal without denying decay, and it endured because it matched reality closely enough to remain useful. Traveller evidence does not always demand belief. Sometimes it demands patience. Egyptian myths persist because they were shaped by long exposure to a universe that rewards attention and punishes neglect. They are not relics of ignorance, but fossils of awareness. And in the end, it is all right to not understand every layer. Evidence does not eliminate mystery, it frames it. Some patterns reveal themselves slowly, others remain buried beneath sand and silence. Tonight the universe whispers again. Listen carefully. Anomalies appear quietly, like hairline fractures in stone that only reveal themselves after centuries of pressure. They do not announce catastrophe. They whisper that something in the pattern does not quite resolve. Egyptian mythology preserves these whispers with unusual honesty. For a civilization devoted to order its myths, are filled with aging gods, wounded deities, interrupted cycles and worlds that nearly fail. This is not accidental. It is evidence of sustained attention to irregularity rather than denial of it. Traveller and anomaly is not chaos itself. It is the signal that chaos is near. The Egyptians lived within rhythms that appeared reliable, yet they also experienced sudden discontinuities. Floods that arrived too early or too late. Harvests that failed without warning. Kings who ruled briefly then vanished. These disruptions were not dismissed as noise. They were absorbed into myth as reminders that balance is conditional. Stability is not the natural state. It is an achievement. Modern science treats anomalies with restraint. Most are measurement errors. Some are artifacts of flawed instruments. But the few that persist reshape entire models. Egyptian mythology behaves with the same discipline. It does not pretend the sun is invincible. It allows the sun god to weaken, descend, and require assistance. Energy fades. Renewal is necessary. This is not poetic pessimism. It is an early intuition of thermodynamic truth. I remember nights alone with instruments calibrated beyond doubt, watching data drift just enough to unsettle certainty. The temptation is always to correct the deviation away to force the model to hold. But sometimes the anomaly is the message. Egyptian priests chose to encode such moments, rather than erase them. They allowed myth to hold what logic alone could not stabilize. Consider the myth in which humanity plots against the sun god, forcing his withdrawal from Earth. This is not merely a moral tale. It reflects an understanding that proximity destabilizes systems. Too much energy concentrated too closely increases volatility. The sun retreats to preserve order. In physics, stars regulate fusion to avoid collapse. In ecology, distance preserves equilibrium. The myth recognizes this instinctively without equations. Observe and notice how Egyptian gods suffer loss without reversal. Osiris is murdered and restored, but not returned to the living world. Horus loses an eye that is healed, yet the wound remains remembered. Restoration does not mean return to original state. It means transformation into a new equilibrium. Modern science calls this irreversibility. Egyptian mythology simply accepted it. Anomalies surface in architecture as well. Structures aligned with precision that seems implausible given known tools. Measurements consistent across generations despite political collapse. Knowledge preserved without explicit explanation. Something endured when systems that carried it should have failed. Myth explains this through divine continuity. Science suspects institutional memory and ritual transmission. Both agree on the anomaly itself. Information survived erasure. I imagine hands guiding hands in dim sanctuaries, corrections passed through movement rather than text. Ritual as memory. When writing fails, repetition endures. Egyptian mythology may encode procedures disguised as stories. Knowledge preserved through enactment rather than archive. This is not mysticism, it is redundancy. Listener anomalies disturb because they resist closure. Egyptian myths leave conflicts unresolved. Chaos is restrained, not destroyed. Order is restored, not secured. This open structure mirrors reality more accurately than myths promising final victory. Stability is temporary. The universe does not settle, it oscillates. Geological records beneath Egypt reinforce this unease. Buried settlements, abandoned river channels, or erased cultures predate the dynasties we name. The land itself remembers resets. Myths of earlier ages ruled by gods may compress vast stretches of forgotten human experience into symbolic time. Not literal reigns, but memories of previous orders lost beyond historical recall. Anomalies also appear in the Egyptian conception of the self. The soul is fragmented into multiple components, each requiring care. This complexity suggests uncertainty. No single pathway guaranteed survival. Redundancy became strategy. Engineers designed systems this way. So did the Egyptians. If one element failed, another might endure. I think of nights in observatories where nothing dramatic occurs, only slight deviations accumulating into doubt. Egyptian mythology does not panic in the face of such doubt. It accommodates it. Multiple creation stories coexist. Contradictions are tolerated. Diversity of explanation becomes protection against oversimplification. Traveller anomalies remind us that understanding is provisional. Egyptian mythology does not ask you to resolve every inconsistency. It invites you to remain attentive, to recognise that systems persist not because they are flawless, but because they adapt while acknowledging fragility. There is a quiet humility embedded here. The universe is not obligated to conform to expectation. The sun may rise tomorrow, but it does so through effort, not promise. Egyptian myths preserve this awareness with remarkable restraint. They do not dramatise collapse excessively. They normalise vulnerability. I imagine scribes copying texts while knowing floods could erase their work. Builders aligning stones aware that sand might swallow them. Such knowledge shapes belief differently than abstract philosophy. It produces myths that accept loss without surrendering to it. Anomalies persist because they are part of the system. Entropy is not an enemy external to order. It is order's shadow. Egyptian mythology never separates the two. Set is not pure evil. He is necessary disruption. Without him, stagnation would replace decay. This is a dangerous insight, and the myths treat it carefully. Listener. This is why Egyptian mythology feels heavy but calm. It does not offer comfort through certainty. It offers steadiness through acceptance. Even gods fail, even cycles break, and still something continues. In the end, traveller, it is all right to not understand every anomaly. Some deviations are not problems to solve. They are reminders that the pattern is alive. Silence is the universe thinking. Tonight the universe whispers again. Silence does not arrive as emptiness. It arrives as concentration, as everything unnecessary, falling away until only structure remains. In Egyptian mythology, silence is not the absence of meaning, but the condition that allows meaning to endure. Before creation there was not sound, not conflict, not motion, but none, the limitless dark water, a state without division or language. This primordial stillness was not chaos in the violent sense. It was unexpressed order waiting for form. Traveller silence appears wherever cycles pause, between inhalation and exhalation, between flood and drought, between life and death. The Egyptians paid close attention to these intervals. They did not rush through them. They understood that transformation does not occur during motion, but during suspension. Their myths linger in these thresholds where nothing seems to happen and everything is prepared. In scientific observation, silence is cultivated deliberately. Instruments are isolated. Noise is filtered out. Only then can faint signals emerge. Egyptian temples functioned in the same way. Thick stone walls muted the world. Ritual speech was measured, restrained, deliberate. Excess sound was considered disruptive. Knowledge required quiet to remain stable. I've spent nights beside instruments powered down, listening to nothing but cooling metal and distant wind. In those hours, progress halts. Yet understanding deepens. Egyptian mythology seems born from such nights, shaped not by urgency but by patience. It reflects a worldview formed through long watching rather than sudden insight. The Egyptian afterlife is defined by silence as much as by judgment. The duat is not loud. It is still. Gates wait. Waters do not move until named. The heart is weighed without argument. No voice persuades the scales. Truth appears only when sound withdraws. Observer, many Egyptian gods embody quiet authority. Thoth records, Osiris presides without speech. Amun, whose name means hidden, governs invisibly. Power does not announce itself. It persists by remaining unseen. Noise belongs to instability. Silence belongs to continuity. Silence also preserves memory. Names carved in stone outlast voices. The Egyptians feared forgetting more than dying. To be erased was final extinction. Silence threatened identity, yet also protected it. Spoken words vanish. Stillness remains. Stone remembers what speech cannot. Geology confirms this principle. Layers accumulate silently. Pressure builds without announcement. Catastrophe appears sudden only because the process was quiet. Egyptian myths rarely describe destruction in detail. They emphasize imbalance beforehand. Silence thickening, order drifting, warnings unheeded. I imagine priests watching the Nile, noting subtle delays, slight shifts in colour, changes too small to alarm. Silence is where attention sharpens. Myth preserved these moments as narrative rather than data. When silence deepens, correction is still possible. Listener. Silence dissolves fear. Noise magnifies threat. Stillness contextualizes it. Egyptian mythology does not shout about chaos. It contains it within calm repetition. Even the great serpent of disorder is faced nightly without panic. Ritual continues. The boat moves forward. Sleep mirrors this process. Thought loosens. Boundaries soften. Memory reorganizes. Egyptian burial practices honored this descent. Tombs were sealed to preserve quiet. The dead required silence to transform. Noise would interrupt becoming. Biology confirms that repair occurs during rest. Cells regenerate. Information consolidates. Systems reset. Silence is not passive, it is active maintenance. Egyptian myths grasped this intuitively. Creation itself required pause before articulation. Traveller silence is not ignorance. It is restraint. Knowing when not to speak preserves structure. Egyptian theology rarely demands final answers. Contradictions coexist. Multiple creation stories remain unresolved. Silence holds complexity without collapse. I think of dust-covered maps, instruments, unused notes unfinished. Understanding does not always advance through effort. Sometimes it arrives through waiting. Egyptian mythology waited centuries between revisions, letting practice refine belief. The decline of Egyptian religion unfolded quietly. Temples closed, rituals ceased, gods were not defeated. Gods were not. They faded into silence, yet that silence preserved them. Names remained carved, waiting for voices to return. Silence carried Egyptian mythology across millennia. Hieroglyphs slept on stone. Myths rested in broken walls. When rediscovery came, it arrived softly through fragments and gaps. Silence had protected meaning until listening resumed. Silence governs cosmic scale as well. Space is not empty. It is quiet energy. Radiation whispers, gravity remembers. Motion emerges from stillness. Egyptian mythology sensed this. The universe was not created through violence, but through articulation breaking silence carefully. Observer, silence is the universe thinking. It is time stretched thin. It is potential held without release. Egyptian myths respect this state. They do not rush creation. They allow it to emerge slowly. In the end, traveller silence is not the end of meaning. It is where meaning rests between cycles. Some mysteries do not speak because they do not need to. Silence is the universe thinking. Tonight it thinks softly. The forgotten epoch does not reveal itself through standing monuments or intact cities waiting beneath the sand. It exists instead as absence, as discontinuity, as stretches of silence where continuity should be. Egyptian mythology returns to this absence again and again, not by filling it with detail, but by acknowledging it as real. Before dynasties, before kings, before even remembered ancestors, there was a time that could not be recalled directly. The Egyptians did not pretend otherwise. They named that depth with gods. Traveller-forgotten epochs are not failures of history. They are consequences of time behaving honestly. Erosion thinks slowly. Water erases patiently. Climate shifts without memory or intention. Civilizations can disappear without leaving stories behind, not because they lacked meaning, but because meaning itself is fragile. Egyptian myths preserve this truth quietly. When they speak of divine reigns lasting tens of thousands of years, they are not measuring duration. They are pointing toward depth beyond record. In geology, deep time is accepted without witnesses. Rock layers speak through pressure and composition, not narrative. Egyptian mythology approaches the past the same way. It does not attempt reconstruction. It accepts that some eras cannot be described, only respected. Gods become placeholders for processes no longer accessible. Creation stories become recovery stories. The universe emerges again after erasure. I imagine standing at excavation sites where cultural layers end abruptly. No gradual decline, no transitional phase. Human presence simply stops. Tools remain where hands abandon them. Fire pits cold forever. Forgotten epochs look like this. Egyptian myth does not deny these breaks. It frames them as transitions between worlds. Creation is repeated in Egyptian theology because memory resets. Each creation account reflects a different attempt to explain emergence after loss. Water recedes, land appears, order is named again. These are not contradictions. They are layered recollections of recovery following disruption. Observer civilizations that survive collapse do not assume permanence. Egypt's extraordinary longevity was paired with profound insecurity. Mythology reflects this tension. It insists that order must be maintained daily because it has failed before. Forgotten epochs leave psychological residue. They shape cultures toward redundancy ritual preservation. Astronomy reinforced this awareness. The stars appear eternal, yet they drift. Precession alters alignments over centuries. Temples built with perfect precision eventually fall out of alignment. Egyptian priests noticed this slow divergence. The heavens themselves are not fixed. Eternity is not static. Forgotten epochs may exist even among stars. I think of scientific baselines shifting so gradually they escape notice until correction becomes impossible. Egyptian mythology encodes the same warning. Creation is not a finished act. It is maintenance. Forgotten epochs teach that neglect invites erasure. Archaeological anomalies suggest human presence in Egypt far earlier than dynastic records acknowledge. Tools without clear lineage, settlements submerged or buried beneath Nile silt, practices appearing suddenly without developmental trace. These fragments suggest long habitation before writing. Myth transforms this uncertainty into divine ancestry, not to deceive but to acknowledge origins beyond recall. Listener-forgotten epochs disturb because they deny narrative comfort. They remind us that memory cannot be trusted to persist. Egyptian mythology confronts this directly. It builds systems designed to outlast forgetting, names carved deeply, rituals repeated exactly, images standardized across centuries. Even so, loss was inevitable. Entire libraries vanished. Languages died. Meanings drifted. Egyptian myths do not deny this erosion. They accommodate it. They accept that completeness is impossible. What matters is alignment, not total preservation. The Egyptian concept of cyclical time emerges naturally from forgotten epochs. Linear history collapses when gaps appear. Cycles allow return without continuity. Time bends, loops, renews. Forgotten epochs become phases rather than endings. I imagine priests teaching initiate stories they themselves knew were incomplete. This did not weaken belief. It created humility. Knowledge was inheritance, not possession, something received, not mastered. Geological resets reinforced this worldview. Floods erase settlements, droughts starve populations. Climate reorganizes possibility. Human systems respond or vanish. Egyptian mythology mirrors this reality without dramatizing despair. It does not promise immunity. It promises renewal through alignment. Traveler-forgotten epochs teach restraint. They warn against arrogance. They suggest that what exists now may not endure. This is not fear. It is preparation. Modern science searches for prior civilizations through faint traces. We debate cataclysms. We model extinction events. Egyptian mythology reached similar conclusions without instruments. It sensed that humanity is not the first to face erasure, nor the last. The gods ruling before humans may symbolize forces shaping worlds before societies emerge. Gravity organizing matter, water carving land, light structuring rhythm. Myth gives these forces faces because faces are remembered when data is not. Listener-forgotten epochs are where myth becomes archive. Not accurate in detail, but faithful in intent, it preserves the truth that existence has restarted before, and may do so again. I think of nights with dust settling on unused equipment, reminders that even our tools will someday fall silent. Egyptian mythology anticipated this. It planned for continuity beyond voice, beyond script, beyond certainty. Forgotten epochs also appear in language itself. Words shift meaning, names change pronunciation. Even gods merge and separate. Identity is not fixed. Egyptian mythology allowed this fluidity. Syncretism was not confusion, it was adaptation. When memory phrase flexibility preserves essence. Observe and notice how Egyptian theology rarely claims final revelation. There is no ultimate book, no single narrative. This absence is intentional. Forgotten epochs taught them that singular records fail. Diversity of expression became survival strategy. The land reinforced this lesson. The Nile nourished, but also buried. Annual floods renewed soil while erasing traces. Egypt thrived within this paradox. Myth reflected it. Creation and destruction intertwined, and destruction. I imagine long nights with scribes copying texts, knowing floods might erase their work, builders aligning stones or where sand would someday cover them. This awareness shaped belief differently than abstract philosophy. It produced myths that accept loss without surrendering meaning. Forgotten epochs challenge modern assumptions about progress. They suggest that advancement is reversible, that complexity can vanish. Egyptian mythology never assumed inevitable improvement. It assumed cycles. Rise, balance, decay, renewal. Listener. This is why Egyptian myths feel ancient and modern at once. They address conditions we still face: environmental instability, cultural fragility, the limits of memory. The forgotten epoch is not behind us, it is around us, beneath our cities, within our archives, waiting quietly. In the end, traveller forgotten epochs do not demand reconstruction. They demand respect. Some histories are not meant to be recovered, only acknowledged. It is all right to not understand. Some mysteries wait, others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again. A reset is never announced. It does not arrive with warning sirens or written declarations. It begins quietly when accumulated strain passes an invisible threshold and a system reconfigures itself without asking permission. Egyptian mythology understands this instinctively. It does not describe the end of worlds as singular cataclysms, but as moments when balance fails and must be re-established through forced withdrawal or transformation. Reset in this worldview is not punishment, it is correction. Traveller, the Egyptians lived in a landscape shaped by reset. The Nile flooded predictably yet not gently. Entire fields vanished beneath water each year. Boundaries dissolved, ownership paused. Then the water withdrew, leaving behind a renewed surface that erased the previous year's markings. Civilization learned early that continuity depends on surrender. You cannot prevent the flood. You prepare for it, endure it, and rebuild afterward. Modern science frames reset through different language. We speak of tipping points, phase transitions, systemic collapse, followed by reorganization. Climate systems shift abruptly after long stability. Magnetic poles reverse. Ecosystems reset through fire, ice, or drought. Egyptian mythology recognized these truths without instrumentation. It encoded them into narrative so they would not be forgotten when memory failed. I think of long-term data sets where trends appear stable until they are not, where change accelerates beyond prediction. Instruments record calmly while systems transform violently. Egyptian myths reflect this calm attention. They do not dramatize reset excessively. They normalize it. The sun god does not panic when attacked. The serpent is expected. The battle is routine. Reset is part of the schedule. Observer, consider the myth of divine withdrawal. When Ra leaves Earth, it is not because creation has failed entirely. It is because proximity has become destabilizing. Too much intensity fractures structure. The god ascends, creating distance, allowing the system to cool. In physics, we see similar behavior. Systems dissipate energy to avoid collapse. Stars regulate fusion. Organisms regulate temperature. Myth mirrors regulation, not judgment. Reset also appears in the myth of Osiris. His death is not erased, it is integrated. The world does not revert to its previous state. Instead, a new structure emerges. Osiris rules the dead, Horus rules the living. Authority is divided to restore balance. Reset does not mean return, it means redistribution. Egyptian kingship itself was designed around reset. Each pharaoh was Horus in life and Osiris in death. Leadership cycled predictably. Power transferred ritually to prevent vacuum. Even chaos was given a role. Set was not eliminated, he was contained. Systems that attempt to erase disruption entirely become brittle. Egyptian mythology avoided this trap. Listener geological evidence supports this worldview. Beneath Egypt's monuments lie layers of earlier habitation erased by water, sand, and time. Reset occurred repeatedly. Cultures adapted or vanished. Myth preserved the memory of these transitions not as dates but as patterns. Worlds end. Worlds resume. Order survives by changing shape. I imagine priests watching subtle environmental shifts. Floods rising too high, crops failing, alignments drifting. Reset is sensed before it is named. Myth provided a framework to interpret these signals without panic. When imbalance grows, correction follows. This knowledge is stabilizing, not frightening. In modern systems, theory resilience depends on flexibility. Rigid systems shatter under stress. Adaptive systems reset locally to preserve global function. Egyptian mythology is remarkably adaptive. Multiple creation stories coexist. Contradictions are tolerated. No single narrative dominates completely. This plurality allows belief to survive disruption. Reset also governs the afterlife. Judgment is final for the individual, yet the cosmos continues. Failure does not destroy existence. It removes unstable elements. The devourer consumes hearts that cannot align. This is not cruelty. It is filtration. Systems preserve coherence by removing destabilizing components. I think of knights reviewing failed experiments. Not every result confirms hypothesis. Some invalidate it. Reset follows. Models adjust. Egyptian mythology anticipates this intellectual humility. It does not cling to explanations that no longer serve balance. When necessary, theology shifts. The Amarna period represents a historical reset attempt. A single god, a single truth, a centralized channel. It failed quickly. The system rejected rigidity. Traditional polycentric balance returned. Reset does not always succeed immediately, but systems learn. Traveler reset is not apocalypse in the modern sense. It is not total annihilation. It is recalibration. Egyptian mythology treats collapse as survivable. Something always continues. Even gods adapt. Even chaos has limits. Astronomy reinforces this lesson. Stars explode, scattering elements that form new systems. Supernovae are resets. Planetary surfaces are erased and reformed. The universe does not conserve structures. It conserves processes. Egyptian mythology aligns with this cosmic logic. I imagine standing beneath temple ceilings painted with stars, knowing the alignments will drift. The builders knew this too. They accepted it. Permanence was symbolic, not literal. Reset was expected beyond human lifespans. Listener resets require memory to be meaningful. Without remembrance, reset becomes erasure. Egyptian rituals ensured memory persisted through transition. Names spoken, stories repeated, symbols reenacted. Reset without memory produces extinction. Reset with memory produces continuity. This is why myth mattered more than record. Stone cracks, papyrus decays, ritual survives, story adapts. Egyptian mythology functioned as portable memory resilient to physical loss. Modern humanity faces similar thresholds: environmental instability, technological acceleration, cultural fragmentation. Egyptian mythology does not offer solutions, it offers perspective. Reset is not evidence of failure, it is evidence of process. I think of quiet acceptance after realizing a system must change. Resistance fades, attention shifts to reconstruction. Egyptian myths dwell in this moment. after the flood, after the death, before the renewal. Traveller reset requires letting go of form while preserving function. Egyptian civilization understood this deeply. Its mythology trained generations to expect transformation without despair. In the end, it is all right to not know when the next reset arrives. Some transitions announce themselves only after completion. The universe does not explain its timing. It simply moves. Tonight the universe whispers again. You are not lost in space. You are part of it. Reset is not the end. It is the breath between cycles. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. An echo is not a repetition. It is a survival. It is what remains after the original force has passed, shaped by distance, by medium, by time. Egyptian mythology exists today, not as a living religion, but as echo. And yet echoes carry information. They reveal the size of the space they travelled through. They tell us something about what once moved with enough power to leave an imprint that could not be erased. Traveller Egypt understood echoes long before sound physics gave them a name. They lived among ruins of their own past, rebuilding temples, atop older foundations, copying texts already ancient to them, reenacting rituals whose origins were lost even as their meanings endured. Civilization did not move forward cleanly. It folded back on itself, listening to what remained. In scientific terms, an echo is delayed signal persistence. Radiation from the early universe still reaches us as background noise. Gravitational waves ripple long after the events that caused them. Egyptian mythology functions similarly. It preserves patterns long after the conditions that produced them vanished. Myth is cultural radiation. I have spent nights listening to faint returns from instruments calibrated to detect almost nothing. The signal arrives weak, distorted, but unmistakably structured. Egyptian myths feel the same. Names shift, symbols blur, yet the underlying rhythm remains intact. Order must be maintained. Balance must be renewed. Collapse is never final. Observer echoes explain why Egyptian concepts reappear across cultures separated by geography and time: judgment after death, weighing of the soul, cyclical renewal, divine order threatened by chaos. These are not borrowed decorations. They are recurring responses to shared human exposure to instability. Egyptian mythology articulated them early with unusual clarity. The echo of Egypt survived conquest. Greek rulers adopted pharaonic imagery. Roman emperors appeared on temple walls performing rituals they barely understood. Christianity rejected Egyptian gods yet absorbed their structures. Saints replaced deities. Resurrection persisted. Judgment endured. The echo adapted because it addressed something fundamental. I imagine priests watching foreigners take control of temples while maintaining rituals unchanged. Power shifted. Forms changed. The underlying structure remained. Echo does not require preservation of origin. It requires relevance. Egyptian mythology remained relevant because it described reality in a way that survived reinterpretation. Listener echoes are strongest where memory fails. When direct knowledge disappears, patterns persist. The loss of hieroglyphic literacy did not erase Egyptian mythology entirely. It transformed it into mystery. Symbols became magical rather than linguistic. Misunderstanding replaced comprehension, yet fascination endured. Echo survived where meaning faded. In archaeology, echoes appear as alignment without explanation. Structures oriented to stars no longer visible. Measurements precise beyond documented method. Knowledge outlasting its carriers. We call this anomaly. The Egyptians would have called it inheritance. Echo does not explain itself. It continues. I think of instruments found centuries later, their purpose unclear, their precision undeniable. Egyptian monuments function similarly. They demand respect even when comprehension fails. Echo forces humility. Egyptian mythology anticipated its own transformation into echo. It invested heavily in repetition rather than originality. Consistency mattered more than innovation. This was not stagnation, it was preservation strategy. Echo survives through redundancy. Observer consider how Egyptian art resisted perspective and realism. Figures remained stylized for millennia. This was not lack of skill, it was resistance to distortion. Naturalism decays with taste. Schematics endure. Egyptian imagery was designed to echo accurately across time. Echo also explains why Egyptian gods merged so easily. Amun-Ra, Ptah, Sokar, Osiris. Identity was fluid. Essence mattered more than name. Echo tolerates variation. It preserves function, not form. In modern physics, we study echoes of cosmic inflation. We analyze residual patterns imprinted before matter existed. Egyptian mythology mirrors this approach. It studies aftermath. What remains after creation, what persists after collapse. I imagine scribes copying texts knowing their meanings might shift. Preservation did not guarantee comprehension, only continuity. Echo does not promise clarity, it promises survival. Listener echoes are why Egyptian mythology feels both distant and intimate. We do not live as they did, yet we recognize the structure of their fears and hopes. Balance, renewal, judgment, transformation. These concerns did not originate with Egypt, but Egypt articulated them with unusual endurance. Echo does not travel unchanged. It degrades, it refracts, it adapts to new environments. Hermetic texts transformed Egyptian concepts into philosophical abstraction. Renaissance thinkers romanticized symbols they misunderstood. Modern media simplifies gods into characters, yet the core persists. Order must be maintained. I think of radio signals from defunct satellites still drifting through space. They no longer carry useful data, yet they mark existence. Egyptian mythology marks a civilization that listened carefully and responded with structure rather than despair. Echo also warns. What survives may not be complete. We inherit fragments, interpretations risk distortion. Egyptian mythology reminds us to approach echoes with caution, reverence without certainty, curiosity without projection. Observer echo teaches that absence is not silence. What seems gone may simply be delayed. Civilizations leave residues. Ideas persist beyond institutions. Egyptian religion ended, but Egyptian thinking did not vanish. It migrated. In neuroscience, memory functions as echo. Experiences leave traces, not full recordings, but impressions shaping future response. Egyptian mythology functioned as cultural memory shaping behavior long after origin faded. I imagine standing in a temple long after rituals ceased. Wind moves through broken columns. Symbols remain. Echo inhabits space. Traveller echo is what allows continuity without permanence. It carries warning and wisdom without demanding belief. Egyptian mythology survives not because it was enforced, but because it resonated. The echo reminds us that we too will become residue. Our systems will fade. Our explanations will fragment. What remains will not be our certainty, but our patterns. In the end, it's all right to not fully understand the echo. Some signals arrive altered by distance. Meaning shifts. What matters is that something still responds. Some mysteries wait. Others watch. Tonight the universe whispers again. Listen carefully. A pattern is not repetition for its own sake. It is structure revealed through recurrence, order emerging from accumulation rather than design. Egyptian mythology is built almost entirely from pattern. Not a single event repeated endlessly, but a configuration that reappears under different names in different forms across vast stretches of time. Creation, balance, disruption, restoration. Over and over with slight variation. Pattern was how the Egyptians recognized truth. Traveller patterns are how scientists learn to trust reality. One measurement means nothing. 100 measurements begin to speak. 1,000 form law. Egyptian civilization lived long enough to observe cycles few cultures could witness in full. Floods rose and fell, dynasties ascended and collapsed, stars shifted slowly against the horizon. From this long exposure pattern emerged. Myth was the language used to store it. Modern science describes pattern through equations and graphs. Egyptian mythology described it through gods and rituals. The method differs. The intent does not. Both seek predictability within uncertainty. Both accept that nothing remains fixed, yet something endures. I think of nights staring at long datasets where individual fluctuations blur into insignificance, but trends reveal themselves with quiet authority. Egyptian myths operate the same way. No single story defines truth. The consistency across stories does. Observer consider how often Egyptian mythology returns to balance. Mat is not an abstract moral code, it is pattern stability. When alignment holds systems function, when alignment drifts, correction follows. Kings exist not to dominate but to maintain pattern. Gods exist not to rule arbitrarily but to stabilize forces larger than themselves. The Nile itself trained this perception. Its flood was neither random nor exact. It varied within tolerable limits. Too little meant famine. Too much meant destruction. Survival depended on recognizing acceptable deviation. Pattern taught restraint. Egyptian myths encode this sensitivity. Extremes are dangerous. Balance sustains. Astronomy reinforced this lesson. The sun rises daily, yet its path shifts gradually. The stars appear fixed, yet precess over centuries. Egyptian priests tracked these movements with patience, noting change without panic. Pattern accommodates drift. It does not require stasis. I imagine priests adjusting temple alignments incrementally aware that precision today becomes error tomorrow. This awareness shaped belief differently than absolutist traditions. Truth was not static. It was maintained. Listener Pattern explains why Egyptian mythology tolerates contradiction. Multiple creation stories coexist because no single narrative captures the whole. Each describes the same emergence from a different angle. Pattern survives through plurality. Singular explanation collapses under complexity. In biology, redundancy protects life. Multiple pathways ensure survival when one fails. Egyptian theology mirrors this principle. Multiple gods govern similar domains. Multiple afterlife routes exist. If one explanation fails, another holds. Pattern persists. I think of neural networks where strength emerges not from individual nodes, but from connection density. Egyptian mythology functioned as a cultural network. Ideas reinforced one another across rituals, stories, architecture, ethics. Pattern was distributed. No single point of failure existed. Pattern also explains the Egyptian obsession with ritual precision. Ritual was not superstition, it was calibration. Repeating actions maintained alignment. Slight deviations accumulated risk. Consistency preserved function. Modern engineering recognizes this. Maintenance prevents collapse. Observer pattern reveals itself through warning signs. Imbalance precedes catastrophe. Egyptian myths focus on these thresholds. The moment before collapse matters more than collapse itself. Pattern teaches anticipation, not reaction. Geology confirms this worldview. Earth systems shift gradually until sudden change occurs. Stress accumulates invisibly. Egyptian mythology preserves this awareness. Chaos does not arrive unannounced, it approaches quietly. Pattern recognition is survival. I imagine scribes recording flood levels year after year, building intuition without formal mathematics. Myth preserved that intuition symbolically. Gods arguing, withdrawing, returning. These narratives encode system feedback loops. Listener pattern is also ethical. Behavior affects outcome. Societies that violate balance destabilize themselves. Egyptian judgment myths are not moral threats. They are pattern enforcement. Actions ripple outward. Consequences follow. In physics, symmetry defines law. Broken symmetry produces change. Egyptian mythology recognizes symmetry intuitively. Dualities abound. Upper and Lower Egypt, life and death, order and chaos. Balance arises through opposition held in tension. I think of long walks among ruins, where stones repeat proportions endlessly. Variation exists, but within constraint. Pattern is visible in architecture because architecture was cosmology made solid. Pattern also explains Egyptian resistance to novelty. Innovation risks destabilizing proven systems. Change was slow, deliberate, tested against tradition. This conservatism preserved continuity. Pattern rewards patience. Observe a pattern does not promise comfort. It promises predictability. Egyptian myths are calm because they accept inevitability. Collapse occurs. Renewal follows. The sequence holds even when outcomes vary. In modern climate science, patterns warn us long before catastrophe. Rising averages matter more than single events. Egyptian mythology functioned as early systems theory. It tracked trend, not anomaly. I imagine elders teaching children through story embedding pattern without numbers. Repetition trained intuition. Understanding emerged gradually. Traveller pattern reveals that humans are participants, not observers. Ritual action matters. Maintenance requires engagement. Egyptian mythology never suggests the universe runs unattended. Order demands work. Pattern also reveals humility. No generation completes the task. Each contributes briefly. Continuity exceeds lifespan. Egyptian myths prepare minds for this scale. I think of my own work ending unfinished notes, abandoned data, incomplete. Pattern continues beyond individual effort. This realization brings calm. In the end, traveller pattern does not require belief. It requires attention. The universe repeats itself not to reassure us, but to remain functional. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only observed. Pattern does not explain everything. It explains enough. Tonight the universe whispers again. Listen to the repetition. A warning in its truest form is not an alarm but a recognition of imbalance before collapse announces itself. In Egyptian mythology, warnings never arrive as sudden catastrophe. They unfold slowly, quietly, encoded in patterns of withdrawal, misalignment, and silence. The gods do not punish first. They recede. Order does not shatter instantly. It thins, stretches, and weakens at the edges. To the Egyptians, warning was not fear-driven prophecy, but observational knowledge. The awareness that systems drifting too far from balance eventually correct themselves whether welcomed or resisted. Traveller, the ancient Egyptians understood something modern science would later formalize: stable systems do not fail without signals. Rivers change course before floods destroy cities. Stars dim subtly before collapse. Societies fracture long before they fall. Mythology became the language through which these early signals were preserved, transmitted, and remembered across generations. The gods arguing, the sun withdrawing, rituals losing effectiveness. These were not stories of superstition but diagnostic metaphors, a record of how imbalance manifests before irreversible correction begins. In laboratories today, warnings appear as trends rather than events. A baseline shifts, noise increases, correlations weaken. Egyptian mythology trained the same sensitivity though expressed through symbol rather than equation. The moment Ra chooses to leave Earth is not divine anger, it is systemic disengagement. When Hathor's destruction is halted, it is not mercy alone, but recognition that unchecked force destabilizes the entire structure. The myth communicates restraint as survival balance, as necessity warning, as opportunity rather than threat. Observer notice how rarely Egyptian mythology depicts absolute annihilation. Even chaos is regulated. Set is dangerous not because he exists, but because he must be constrained. Apophis is defeated nightly, yet never destroyed, because destruction itself would unbalance the cycle. This is a profound warning encoded in narrative forces cannot be eliminated, only managed. Attempts at total eradication create instability. Control through balance sustains order longer than domination through force. The Nile itself was the most persistent warning system Egypt possessed. Its floods were measured, anticipated, and interpreted with reverence. Too little water meant famine. Too much meant devastation. Neither abundance nor scarcity was inherently good. Moderation was survival. Mythology absorbed this reality, transforming hydrological awareness into cosmic principle. Ma'at was not morality alone. It was equilibrium across natural, social, and celestial domains. When balance faltered, warning signs appeared everywhere at once. Listener Egyptian afterlife judgment reflects the same logic. The heart is not condemned for singular acts, but weighed as an accumulated pattern. Imbalance grows gradually. Ethical failure is systemic, not episodic. This mirrors modern understandings of entropy and feedback loops where small deviations amplify when unchecked. The warning is never the final judgment. It is the moment when correction remains possible. Once the scale tips, irreversibly consequence follows without malice or intention. In my own long nights surrounded by quiet instruments, I have learned that warning rarely feels dramatic. It feels like discomfort, like data that refuses to settle, like a graph bending ever so slightly in the wrong direction. Egyptian mythology teaches the same attentiveness. Its warnings are subtle, because reality itself is subtle. Catastrophe is loud, but by the time it arrives, listening no longer matters. Observer consider the repeated mythic theme of divine withdrawal. Ra ascends, the gods become distant. Communication weakens. This is not abandonment, it is diagnostic. Systems failing to maintain balance lose access to sustaining energy. In physics, when equilibrium breaks, systems decouple. In mythology, gods retreat. The metaphor holds. Distance increases, support diminishes. The warning is embedded in absence rather than violence. Environmental archaeology confirms this worldview. Egyptian civilization endured precisely because it responded to early warnings. It adapted rituals, restructured authority, reinforced institutions. When those adaptive mechanisms failed under external pressure, internal rigidity or accumulated imbalance collapse followed. Not suddenly, but gradually. Warning signs multiplied, archaizing revival, intensified ritual obsession with past perfection. These were symptoms of instability, cultural immune responses activating too late. Traveller warning in Egyptian thought is communal. No individual escapes systemic failure. Kings are divine not for privilege but for responsibility. Their failure destabilizes everyone. This is why mythology emphasizes kingship as cosmic function rather than personal power. When rulers fail to maintain Mat, the universe itself responds. Disorder spreads, crops fail, borders weaken, warning becomes visible everywhere at once. Modern systems echo this truth. Climate economy biosphere, none collapse locally. Feedback loops propagate consequences globally. Egyptian mythology anticipated this interconnectedness intuitively. It framed the universe as a single organism where imbalance in one region reverberates throughout the whole. Warning is collective. Correction is unavoidable. Ignorance does not confer immunity. I imagine ancient priests observing stars drift slowly against fixed alignments, aware that even the heavens change. Precession was not unknown to them. Their temples misaligned over centuries, yet they continued building, accepting adjustment as future responsibility. This too is warning internalized, nothing remains fixed, and maintenance is perpetual. Stability is not permanence, it is continual recalibration. Listener Egyptian myths also warn against excess certainty. Multiple creation myths coexist without conflict. Contradiction is tolerated. Flexibility preserves balance. Systems that insist on singular truth fracture when reality diverges. Warning appears when rigidity replaces adaptability. Egyptian theology survived millennia because it allowed variation without collapse, multiplicity without chaos. Geological time reinforces this humility. Earth resets regardless of belief. Ice advances, seas rise, continents drift. Egyptian mythology did not deny these forces, it integrated them symbolically. Flood myths are not warnings of divine punishment but acknowledgements of cyclical reset. Preparation matters more than explanation. Survival depends on alignment, not understanding. Observer warning is also encoded in memory. Forgetting weakens resilience. Loss of ritual knowledge, historical continuity and cultural context destabilizes identity. Egyptian mythology treated remembrance as preventative maintenance. Names preserved existence, stories sustained order. Forgetting invited dissolution. This applies equally to civilizations and individuals. In contemporary science, resilience depends on early detection and adaptive response. Egyptian mythology served this function culturally. It trained populations to notice imbalance, to respect limits, to accept uncertainty. Its warnings were not predictions but frameworks for perception. Those who listened adjusted. Those who ignored persisted briefly then vanished. I think of elders teaching caution through narrative rather than decree. Myth bypasses resistance. It embeds warning, gently allowing reflection without panic. Egyptian stories are slow because reality is slow. Collapse takes time, so does prevention. Traveller warnings do not guarantee survival, they guarantee opportunity. Egyptian civilization endured for thousands of years because it responded often enough. Eventually, external pressures exceeded adaptive capacity. Collapse occurred. Yet the warning survived the civilization. Myth outlasted temples. Meaning persisted without institutions. This is the final warning. Egyptian mythology offers systems end but patterns repeat. Knowledge lost returns differently. Collapse is not failure, it is transition. What matters is what survives the transition. Observer, our era, receives this warning through instruments rather than gods. Data replaces prophecy. Yet the message is unchanged. Balance must be maintained. Systems respond predictably to neglect. Warning is not fear, it is respect for thresholds. Egyptian mythology cultivated threshold awareness deeply. It did not promise salvation through domination, only endurance through alignment. I think of moments before sleep when the mind gently reviews misalignments, adjusting softly before rest. Correction happens quietly when attention is present. Ignored imbalance accumulates. In the end, traveller warning is an act of care. The universe does not threaten, it informs. Those who listen endure longer. Those who refuse eventually learn through loss. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only observed. Some warnings are not meant to alarm, only to guide. Tonight, the universe whispers again. Listen carefully. The sky was never empty to the ancient Egyptians. It was layered, inhabited, alive with motion that followed laws, both observable and mysterious. Above the Nile, the heavens were not a distant backdrop, but an active system whose rhythms governed time, power, death, and renewal. The sky was a record, a warning surface, and a memory archive written in light. Every dawn and every nightfall carried information, and Egyptian mythology emerged as a long meditation on how to read that information without believing it was ever fully owned by human minds. Traveller to look at the sky in ancient Egypt was to look at continuity itself. Stars returned. The sun never failed to rise for long. Even the moon's disappearance was temporary, its absence part of a larger rhythm. This predictability did not produce complacency. It produced humility. The Egyptians understood that stability did not mean control. It meant participation in a system that tolerated life only as long as balance was respected. The sky taught patience, repetition, and restraint, long before science gave those concepts mathematical language. Modern astronomy confirms what Egyptian myth intuited. The sky is structured by cycles so vast they dwarf individual existence. Precession shifts constellations slowly across millennia. Solar output fluctuates subtly but decisively. Magnetic fields wax and wane. These processes are not dramatic to daily perception, yet they determine long-term habitability. Egyptian theology encoded these truths symbolically. Nut swallowing the sun each evening is not fantasy. It is recognition that disappearance does not equal extinction, that descent precedes renewal. Observer Egyptian pyramids were not merely tombs, but instruments aligned to the sky. Their shafts pointed towards circumpolar stars that never set celestial anchors of permanence amid motion. This alignment was not superstition, but applied cosmology. The sky was used as reference, a fixed framework against which human time could be measured. Death itself was calibrated against stellar motion. The king ascended not metaphorically but geometrically aligned with trajectories that transcended seasonal change. I have spent nights beneath observatory domes watching star fields drift almost imperceptibly. The movement is too slow to feel urgent, yet it never stops. Egyptian mythology treats the sky similarly. It is calm, immense, and indifferent to impatience. Those who align with it endure longer. Those who demand immediate response misunderstand its scale. The sky teaches proportion, reminding civilizations of their size without hostility. The sun-ra dominates Egyptian cosmology, not because of brightness alone, but because of reliability. Its daily journey provided a template for understanding survival in a universe governed by recurrence rather than progress. Where ages weakens, descends, and renews, this cycle denies linear triumph. Even gods must pass through darkness. The warning is subtle, but profound permanence belongs only to process, not to form. Listener, Egyptian myths describe the sky as a battleground each night, yet never as a war that can be won. Apophis returns endlessly. Chaos is not eliminated because elimination itself would end the cycle. Modern physics echoes this through entropy. Order must be constantly maintained. Stability is not achieved once. It is rehearsed daily. The sky repeats its lesson relentlessly, and Egyptian mythology listens without protest. Astronomy today reveals that Earth exists within a fragile window of stellar behaviour. A slight increase in solar luminosity alters climate irreversibly. A nearby supernova would reshape biospheric chemistry. Egyptian myths did not quantify these dangers, but they acknowledged vulnerability. The sky could bless or withdraw. Ra could retreat. The heavens were not guarantees, they were conditions. Life existed at their discretion, not the reverse. Observe the sky in Egyptian art is often painted with stars evenly spaced, orderly, serene. This is not naivety. It is aspiration. The ideal sky is balanced. Deviations signal danger. Eclipses, comets, unusual phenomena were watched closely. Not feared irrationally, but noted. Anomalies mattered. The sky was a diagnostic surface, and mythology preserved interpretive frameworks long before instruments existed. In my own work, unexpected readings command attention not because they are dramatic, but because they indicate underlying shifts. Egyptian priests did the same, translating deviation into story, ensuring memory could travel across generations. Myth is not distortion, it is compression. Complex astronomical awareness was preserved in narrative form accessible to non-specialists. Traveller the sky also governed morality. Mark was reflected in celestial order. When stars followed their paths, society felt just. When irregularities multiplied, disorder was suspected on Earth. This may sound symbolic, but it reflects a systems-based worldview. Social stability and environmental stability are linked. When governance fails, ecological mismanagement follows. The sky mirrors consequences without judgment. Modern climate science demonstrates similar coupling. Atmospheric instability reflects human imbalance. The sky records excess through temperature chemistry circulation. The Egyptian intuition that cosmic order and human behaviour are entangled proves less mystical than predictive. They lacked equations, but not perception. The Milky Way itself, identified with celestial waters, framed the afterlife as spatial rather than abstract. Souls travelled. Transformation required navigation. Today, astrophysics confirms that space is not empty, but structured by filaments, voids, and currents. Egyptian cosmology anticipated this by populating the sky with pathways rather than emptiness. Listener, Egyptian myths never promise escape from the sky's authority. They promise integration. Joining the solar bark, becoming an imperishable star, lining with eternal cycles, these are metaphors for synchronization. Survival depends on resonance, not rebellion. I imagine ancient observers tracking heliacal risings, marking time by first light rather than clocks. Precision without haste, awareness without control. This posture allowed Egyptian civilization to coexist with cosmic reality longer than most. The sky also preserves memory beyond civilization. Stars visible to the first pharaoh are visible now, shifted but present. Empires vanish, patterns remain. The Egyptian mythology recognized this asymmetry. Human institutions are temporary, cosmic structures are persistent. This recognition produced neither despair nor arrogance, only acceptance. Observe when Egyptian religion faded, the sky did not change. Temples closed, rituals ceased, but the sun still rose. This continuity validated their worldview even in absence. Gods withdrew, but patterns endured. Meaning migrated from practice to memory, from institution to study. Modern astronomy restores Egyptian myths not as beliefs, but as early models of cosmic participation. They remind us that observation preceded explanation, and humility preceded mastery. The sky does not require worship to function, but it rewards attention. Traveller the sky is not silent. It speaks through repetition. through consistency, through deviation. Egyptian mythology listened patiently. It did not demand answers, only alignment. As night deepens, the sky becomes less legible to wakeful thought. Stars soften, constellations blur, understanding yields to presence. This is where Egyptian cosmology meets sleep. Knowledge rests. Patterns continue without interpretation. In the end, listener, the sky is not something above you. It is a system you inhabit. You are not lost beneath it. You are part of it. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only observed. Tonight the universe whispers again, written in light across the dark. Stay with it. The earth to the ancient Egyptians was never inert matter beneath the feet. It was a living surface shaped by memory pressure and return. The land itself recorded time in layers just as the sky recorded it in cycles. Along the Nile, Earth was not permanent ground, but a temporary form repeatedly erased and rewritten by water. Egyptian mythology absorbed this instability deeply, understanding that solidity was an illusion maintained by rhythm. What appeared fixed was only pause between transformations. Traveller the Nile taught Egypt how planets behave. Each year it rose, dissolved boundaries, erased property lines, swallowed roads and fields, then retreated, leaving behind fertility and reordered space. This was not destruction, it was reset. The Egyptians did not fear this process. They synchronized with it. Their calendar, agriculture, theology and kingship aligned to the river's pulse. Earth was dependable precisely because it was not static. Stability emerged from repetition, not resistance. Modern geology confirms what myth intuited. Continents drift. Mountains rise and erode. Sediment remembers floods long after cultures forget them. Earth's crust behaves like slow thought, grinding ideas into form over immense spans of time. Egyptian myths did not describe plate tectonics, but they encoded the logic of it. Geb, the earth god, lies beneath Nut, not in subjugation, but in tension. Space exists only because separation is maintained. When boundaries fail, collapse follows. Observer Egyptian temples were anchored deliberately to Earth's behaviour. Foundations were laid according to flood lines, celestial alignment and stone stability. Builders understood that architecture must cooperate with geology. Pyramids were not defiance of re-erosion but negotiations with it. Their mass countered wind, their angles shed sand, their placement avoided flood reach. Mythological permanence depended on material intelligence. Stone chosen incorrectly would not preserve names. Memory required compatible matter. I have held sediment cores pulled from ancient floodplains, each layer marking a season of excess or scarcity. Earth speaks slowly, but it speaks clearly. Egyptian mythology listened by watching how land responded to imbalance. When floods failed, rituals intensified. When soil thinned, offerings increased. These were not superstitions but feedback responses, early attempts at environmental correction framed symbolically, because symbolic language travels farther than technical instruction. Listener, the earth in Egyptian cosmology is not benevolent or hostile. It is conditional. Fertility follows balance. Barren desert surrounds abundance as reminder, not enemy. The red land exists to define the black. Excess cultivation beyond limits invites collapse. Myth preserved this wisdom by embedding it into moral structure. To violate Mart was to destabilize not only society but soil itself. Ethics and ecology were inseparable. Archaeology reveals moments when this balance faltered. Overextension, resource strain, central authority weakening. Each collapse followed environmental stress interacting with social rigidity. Egyptian civilization endured because it adapted repeatedly, but no system adapts forever. Eventually resilience erodes. Earth does not negotiate indefinitely, it responds. Observer Egyptian burial practices reflect Earth's role in transformation. Bodies return to ground not as waste but as participants in a larger cycle. Preservation was not denial of decay, but guidance of it. Mummification slowed decomposition long enough for symbolic transition. Earth reclaimed eventually, but meaning was extracted first. This is not denial of impermanence, it is timing. Modern science recognizes similar strategies. Preservation extends utility. Conservation delays loss, but nothing escapes entropy. Egyptian mythology did not promise eternal material existence. It promised continuity through transformation. Earth was collaborator, not adversary. Dust was not failure, it was completion. I think of long surveys conducted in silence maps dusted with sand measurements, taken knowing outcomes will arrive decades later. Earth demands patience. Egyptian myths teach patience by framing time as layered rather than linear. The land remembers everything. What is buried is not gone. It waits. Listener, consider how often Egyptian stories begin with emergence from earth or water. Creation rises, it does not descend. This orientation matters. Earth is source, not grave. Even Osiris, dismembered and buried, becomes ruler through integration with land. Vegetation myth encodes agricultural truth. Grain dies to rise again. Soil is not end state, it is intermediary. Geophysics shows that Earth stores energy invisibly, releasing it suddenly through earthquakes, eruptions, floods. Egyptian mythology did not predict these events individually, but it recognized the principle suppressed imbalance seeks expression. This is why rituals existed to release tension symbolically before it manifested physically. Whether effective or not, the intent reflects system awareness. Observer modern civilization often treats Earth as background rather than participant. Egyptian culture did not make this mistake. Their gods walked landforms. Sacred geography mattered. Certain places amplified stability. Others signaled danger. This spatial awareness prevented uniform exploitation. Not all land was equal. Not all soil should be disturbed. I imagine ancient surveyors watching erosion lines, adjusting boundaries accordingly. No fixed borders. Flexibility preserved survival. Myth encoded these practices into divine law, so they would be remembered when original reasons were forgotten. This is the power of symbolic transmission. Traveller Earth does not punish. It responds. Egyptian mythology understood this deeply. When harmony breaks, correction follows without malice. Collapse is not vengeance. It is physics expressed socially. This realization removes fear and replaces it with responsibility. In sleep, the body mirrors Earth. Muscles repair, cells reset, waste clears. Rest is not inactivity, it is maintenance. Earth rests through cycles. Floods redistribute nutrients. Seasons redistribute energy. Egyptian myths narrate this rest so humans learn to pause as well. As night deepens, attention turns inward. Thoughts sediment. Memories settle. The earth beneath you continues its slow movement, indifferent yet sustaining. You are not separate from it. You are temporary form within longer process. In the end, Traveller Earth is not something you stand on. It is something you pass through. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only observed. It's all right to not understand. Tonight, the ground holds you quietly, remembering everything. Return is never a reversal. In Egyptian mythology, to return is to re-enter a pattern already in motion, not to reclaim an earlier state unchanged. The sun does not rise as the same sun that set. The river does not flood the same fields in the same way. Even the dead who return as Ak are not restored versions of themselves, but transformed presences shaped by passage through darkness. Return is continuity without repetition, a principle the Egyptians understood with quiet clarity long before modern science gave language to irreversible processes. Traveller. The concept of return governs every layer of Egyptian cosmology. Ra returns each dawn, yet aged by night. Osiris returns through vegetation, not as a living king. The deceased return through memory, name and ritual, not through flesh. Nothing comes back untouched. This is not loss, it is integration. The universe remembers what has passed and allows it to persist in altered form. Return is how time forgives impermanence without denying it. Modern physics mirrors this logic. Systems do not rewind. Entropy prevents perfect reversal. Yet matter and energy recycle endlessly, assuming new configurations. Atoms that once formed stars become soil. Radiation that once marked catastrophe becomes background whisper. Egyptian mythology expresses this same understanding symbolically. The dead feed the land. The land feeds the living. Memory feeds identity. Return is circulation, not resurrection. Observer Egyptian funerary texts describe the deceased coming forth by day, a phrase often misunderstood as literal reanimation. In truth, it signals reintegration with observable cycles. To return is to participate again in light. Movement and recognition. This return requires preparation, knowledge, and alignment. Without those, the dead remain inert. Modern science echoes this condition. Systems rejoin function only when compatible with surrounding structures. Misaligned components are excluded, not punished, simply unable to operate. I have watched long abandoned instruments brought back online after years of dormancy. They do not resume instantly. Calibration is required. Components must adapt to new conditions. Egyptian return follows the same principle. The soul must learn the landscape of the Duat, memorize names, understand gates. Return is skill, not entitlement. Listener Egyptian kingship itself is structured around return. Each new pharaoh is not a replacement but a continuation. Horus returns in new form. Osiris persists through succession. Authority flows never stops. This prevented political rupture from being framed as collapse. Even disruption could be absorbed as transition. Modern institutions often fail because they resist this principle, clinging to static identity, rather than allowing controlled transformation. Archaeology shows that Egypt repeatedly returned to older forms during crisis. Archaizing periods revived ancient styles, language, and ritual. This was not nostalgia, it was recalibration. Returning to foundational patterns restored coherence when innovation destabilized balance. Return here is corrective, not regressive. It is memory applied as medicine. Observe or consider how human sleep functions as return. Each night consciousness withdraws, dissolves and reforms, memory consolidates, systems reset. The waking self returns, altered, subtly reorganized. Egyptian mythology aligns perfectly with this biological rhythm. Death is sleep extended beyond familiarity. Return is awakening at another scale. The Nile embodies return physically. Its flood retreats, yet the land does not revert to its previous shape. New channels appear. Old boundaries dissolve. Return brings difference, not restoration. Egyptian land surveys adapted yearly. Nothing permanent was assumed. Stability emerged from expectation of change, not denial of it. Modern climate science confirms that Earth systems oscillate around shifting baselines. Return never means recovery to identical conditions. It means adaptation to new equilibrium. Egyptian myths prepared their society for this truth psychologically. Change was normal. Continuity depended on response, not resistance. Listener Egyptian gods themselves return in altered forms. Amun merges with Ra. Local deities become national. Identity shifts without annihilation. This fluidity preserved relevance. Gods that could not adapt faded quietly. No violent theological rupture occurred until external systems imposed rigidity. Return requires flexibility. I think of academic rediscoveries texts return to readability after centuries of silence. Meaning returns, but context shifts. We read Egyptian mythology differently than its creators did, yet something essential survives. Return is imperfect transmission, but sufficient. Observer Egyptian mythology even anticipates cultural return after extinction. Names carved in stone awaited voices that would one day speak them again. The gods did not need continuous worship. They required remembrance. Silence did not kill them. It preserved them. Return occurred through scholarship, imagination, and reinterpretation. This is perhaps the most profound Egyptian insight. Disappearance does not equal erasure. Systems withdraw, but traces remain. Return happens when conditions permit. Knowledge lost is not destroyed, it is inaccessible. When tools change, access returns. Hieroglyphs waited patiently. They did not decay. They slept. Modern information theory supports this. Data persists until corrupted. Absence of decoding does not eliminate signal. Egyptian mythology treated memory similarly. Preservation mattered more than immediacy. Return could be delayed indefinitely without losing validity. Traveller return is not guaranteed. It depends on preparation. Names unspoken fade. Systems neglected decay beyond recovery. Egyptian rituals existed to maintain pathways for return. When those practices ceased, return became improbable, but not impossible. Recovery requires effort proportional to neglect. In sleep, we practice return nightly. We trust that consciousness will reassemble. This trust is learned. Egyptian mythology trained its people to trust cycles beyond individual control. Fear dissolves when return is expected, even if altered. Observe modern humanity faces its own return thresholds. Environmental reset, cultural transformation, technological recalibration. Egyptian mythology does not offer solutions, but it offers posture. Do not expect restoration. Expect transformation. Align with process, not outcome. I imagine ancient priests extinguishing temple lamps at night, knowing they would be relit at dawn. Darkness was not abandonment. It was interval. Return was assumed but not taken for granted. Ritual ensured it. Listener. The return is always quieter than departure. Collapse is loud. Renewal is subtle. Egyptian myths whisper this repeatedly. After flood silence, after judgment stillness, after death waiting. Return does not announce itself. It arrives gradually. As sleep approaches, thoughts loosen their grip. The mind prepares to return to itself in altered form. This is not loss. It is necessary. Identity survives because it changes. In the end, traveller return is the universe's compromise between permanence and decay. Nothing is saved unchanged. Nothing is lost completely. Some mysteries wait, others watch. It's all right to not understand. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch, and in its own time you will return. Reflection is not retrospection. In Egyptian mythology, reflection is the act of alignment between what has been lived and what has been understood, a slow reconciliation between experience and pattern. It is the pause after movement, the still water after flood, the quiet interval, where meaning settles without demand for conclusion. Reflection is where knowledge stops advancing and begins to arrange itself into something livable. The Egyptians did not rush this process. They allowed reflection to unfold across lifetimes, dynasties, and millennia, trusting that clarity arrives only when urgency recedes. Traveller Egyptian mythology is itself a reflection rather than a proclamation. It does not insist, it contemplates. Gods debate rather than decree. Truth emerges through balance rather than victory. Even judgment scenes are reflective rather than punitive, measuring weight rather than listing crimes. This posture reveals a civilization more concerned with coherence than control, more invested in continuity than conquest. Reflection is how they maintained stability without stagnation. Modern science recognizes reflection as essential to understanding. Data without interpretation is noise. Observation without integration produces fragmentation. Egyptian myth served as an integrative framework, allowing astronomy, agriculture, ethics, and governance to exist within a single reflective system. The universe was not split into domains. Everything echoed everything else. Reflection allowed these echoes to remain audible without collapsing into confusion. Observer, consider how Egyptian art repeats forms with subtle variation. The same poses, the same proportions, the same motifs recur endlessly, yet no two expressions are identical. This is reflection rendered visually. Stability without rigidity, familiarity without sameness. Reflection does not invent, it adjusts. It refines perception through repetition rather than novelty. I've often returned to the same datasets years later, seeing patterns invisible at first encounter. Time itself becomes an analytical tool. Egyptian mythology anticipated this. Myths were retold not to preserve exact wording, but to allow insight to deepen through recurrence. Meaning was expected to evolve. Reflection was cumulative. Listener Egyptian theology does not present humans as separate from the cosmos. Reflection collapses that distance. Humans are participants in cosmic maintenance. Their actions matter because they resonate. Reflection reveals consequence without assigning blame. When imbalance appears, the question is not who failed, but where alignment shifted. This removes fear and replaces it with responsibility. The afterlife judgment reflects this ethic. The heart is weighed, not interrogated. Reflection is internal. No external accusation is required. This mirrors modern psychological insight. Guilt imposed externally fractures identity. Reflection integrates it. Egyptian mythology trusted internal reckoning more than external enforcement. Observer reflection also governs Egyptian attitudes toward knowledge limits. Contradictory creation myths coexist peacefully. No single narrative claims supremacy. This is not indecision. It is recognition that reflection requires multiplicity. Truth is approached asymptotically, never captured fully. Modern science echoes this through models that approximate reality without claiming finality. I think of nights spent rereading field notes, finding meaning in margins in what was not emphasized. Egyptian myths are full of such margins. What is unsaid often matters more than what is dramatized. Reflection attends to silence as carefully as sound. Traveler reflection is also how Egyptian civilization processed catastrophe. Periods of collapse were followed by renewed emphasis on past wisdom. This was not denial, but diagnosis. Reflection sought continuity beneath disruption. When innovation failed, memory guided repair. This pattern allowed recovery repeatedly, until external forces overwhelmed adaptive capacity. Modern societies often mistake reflection for regression. Egyptian culture did not. Looking backward was not retreat. It was recalibration. Memory functioned as stabilizer. Reflection preserved resilience by preventing overcorrection. Listener Egyptian mythology reflects a profound acceptance of uncertainty. Gods age, power shifts, order must be maintained actively. Nothing is guaranteed. Reflection teaches comfort with this reality. Anxiety dissolves when uncertainty is normalized. Sleep becomes possible when the mind stops demanding resolution. In neuroscience, reflection consolidates learning during rest. Experiences integrate into identity. Without reflection, trauma fragments memory. Egyptian funerary practices may be understood similarly. Rituals guided the dead through reflection, integrating life experience into transformed identity. Reflection prevented disintegration. Observer reflection also mediates between scale. Egyptian myths connect the cosmic with the domestic. Household gods matter as much as solar deities. Childbirth amulets coexist with stellar theology. Reflection allows multiple scales to coexist without hierarchy. Significance is contextual, not absolute. I imagine priests, farmers, and scribes sharing a worldview that allowed personal hardship to be contextualized within cosmic rhythm. Reflection transformed suffering into participation, rather than isolation. This psychological architecture sustained resilience across generations. Traveler reflection is not passive, it is work done quietly. Egyptian rituals slowed time deliberately to allow reflection. Modern life resists this pause, accelerating until coherence fractures. Myth reminds us that systems require intervals of non-action to remain functional. In sleep, reflection becomes involuntary. Dreams integrate fragments beyond conscious control. Egyptian mythology trusted this process symbolically. Transformation occurs when effort ceases. Reflection is surrender to integration rather than insistence on clarity. Observer the persistence of Egyptian mythology itself is a reflection of reflection. It survives not because it answers questions, but because it frames them in ways that remain adaptable. Each era reflects differently upon the same symbols, extracting new relevance without exhausting meaning. Modern scholarship reflects on Egyptian texts not to recover belief, but to understand process. This meta-reflection extends the mythology's function beyond religion into epistemology. How humans know, remember, and adapt becomes the enduring lesson. Listener reflection tempers ambition. Egyptian culture built monumental architecture yet accepted impermanence. This balance prevented despair. Achievements mattered, but they were not mistaken for eternity. Reflection kept aspiration proportional to reality. I think of standing before ruins at dusk, light, fading details softening. Structures lose sharpness, but presence remains. Reflection allows appreciation without ownership. This is how Egyptian mythology invites engagement. Observe, align, release. Traveller reflection dissolves fear of endings. When cycles are understood, termination becomes transition. Egyptian myths do not deny death, they contextualize it. Reflection transforms mortality from threat into process. As night deepens, thoughts naturally turn reflective. The mind surveys the day not to judge but to integrate. Egyptian mythology mirrors this nightly ritual at the civilizational scale. It reviews existence continuously, adjusting alignment through story rather than decree. In the end, observer reflection is the final safeguard against chaos. Systems collapse when reflection ceases. Attention restores balance. Memory preserves orientation. Silence allows recalibration. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only observed. Reflection honors this truth without frustration. It is all right to not understand. Tonight, as awareness softens and boundaries blur, let reflection settle gently. The universe does not rush its conclusions, and neither must you. Descent is not collapse. It is the controlled surrender of tension, the gradual release of vigilance that allows deeper systems to assume responsibility. In Egyptian mythology, descent is never framed as failure. The sun descends each night not because it is defeated, but because renewal requires withdrawal. Consciousness follows the same rule. Awareness narrows, effort dissolves, and the surface mind steps aside so older, quieter processes can take over. Sleep is not disappearance. It is transition into another mode of order. Traveller. The Egyptians understood descent intimately. Their gods descended into the Duat nightly. Their dead descended into the earth. Their rituals slowed, the body softened, the voice dimmed the light. Nothing was rushed. Descent required permission. One did not fall into darkness. One entered it deliberately trusting that structure persisted even when visibility faded. This trust made rest possible in a world filled with uncertainty. Modern neuroscience confirms that sleep is an active descent. Neural networks shift to dominance. External monitoring reduces. Internal maintenance begins. Memory reorganizes itself. Waste clears. The mind descends from narrative thought into pattern processing. Egyptian mythology anticipated this biological reality symbolically. The Duat is not chaos. It is structured darkness divided into regions governed by rules navigable by those prepared. Darkness here is not danger, but complexity beyond waking comprehension. Observer, notice how Egyptian texts rarely dramatize the moment of falling asleep or dying. They focus instead on preparation. Spells are learned. Names are memorized. Amulets are placed. Alignment matters more than the moment itself. Descent succeeds when readiness precedes it. Sleep works the same way. When resistance softens, descent becomes gentle. When resisted, it becomes restless. I have watched long experiments shut down for the night systems transitioning from active measurement to passive recording. Nothing stops abruptly. Power scales down gradually. Sensors recalibrate. This descent preserves integrity. Egyptian rituals served the same function. They guided transition carefully to avoid fragmentation. Listener descent also appears in Egyptian art through posture. Figures sit, recline, lower their gaze. Energy is conserved. Authority does not require constant display. Power rests when not needed. This cultural comfort with lowering intensity allowed Egyptian society to endure extended cycles without burnout. Constant vigilance exhausts systems. Periodic descent restores them. In sleep, the ego loosens its grip. Identity softens. Boundaries blur. Egyptian mythology mirrors this dissolution through transformation. Gods change form. Humans become Ak. Names persist while bodies change. Descent dismantles rigidity without erasing essence. What matters survives the process. Observer Egyptian funerary architecture reinforces this logic. Tombs descend underground not to hide the dead, but to place them within stable thermal and environmental conditions. Earth shelters transformation. Descent provides protection. The surface world is volatile. Below process is slow. This is not burial as negation, but as incubation. Geology supports this metaphor. Pressure and darkness produce change. Minerals form, fossils preserve. Earth transforms matter patiently. Sleep performs a similar role in the psyche. Experiences compact. Identity crystallizes. Descent allows coherence to emerge without conscious effort. Traveller Egyptian myths also emphasize guardians at thresholds, gates watchers' names. These are not obstacles but guides. They ensure descent proceeds in sequence. Modern sleep studies identify similar gating mechanisms. Sensory input reduces gradually. Dream states emerge in stages. Abrupt descent causes disturbance. Guided descent maintains stability. I think of nights when sleep arrives easily, and nights when it resists. The difference is not fatigue, but surrender. Egyptian mythology does not force descent. It invites it through ritual repetition and trust. Darkness is not commanded. It is welcomed. Listener descent is also humility. Egyptian gods descend despite power. Ra ages nightly. Osiris rules from below. Osiris rules. Authority does not require elevation at all times. This challenges modern assumptions equating ascent with success. Sustainability requires oscillation. Continuous ascent destabilizes systems. In physics, energy states decay toward equilibrium unless maintained. Rest allows return to baseline. Egyptian cosmology frames this as necessary balance. The universe itself descends cyclically, releasing tension, accumulated during expansion. Sleep aligns the human body with this cosmic rhythm. Observe and notice how Egyptian mythology avoids sharp endings. Stories taper. Rituals conclude softly. Silence follows. This narrative descent prepares the listener for rest rather than resolution. The goal is not closure, but continuity. Sleep functions similarly. Conscious thought fades without conclusion. Meaning persists without articulation. As awareness lowers, fear loses structure. Threats require attention to exist. Descent reduces their clarity. Egyptian mythology does not banish fear through conquest. It dissolves it through context. Chaos exists, but it is contained within larger order. Darkness is navigable. Traveller, your own descent tonight mirrors these ancient patterns. Muscles loosen, breath slows, thoughts lengthen and drift. This is not loss of control. It is redistribution of control to systems that have always known how to function without supervision. The Egyptians trusted these systems deeply. They trusted the sun to return. They trusted the river to recede. They trusted the dead to transform. Trust made descent peaceful. Anxiety arises when trust erodes. Myth restores it by reminding the mind of continuity beyond perception. Listener descent is not something you do. It is something you allow. The more gently you allow it, the more complete it becomes. Egyptian rituals understood this, designing environments that encouraged letting go rather than striving. As night deepens, external distinctions soften. Inside and outside blur. Time stretches. Identity relaxes. This is the state Egyptian mythology prepares for not escape but integration. In the end, traveller descent is a kindness the universe extends to all systems that have worked long enough. You are not falling. You're being carried downward into maintenance, into quiet, into repair. Some mysteries wait, others watch. It's all right to not understand. Let the descent continue. Sleep is not the end. It is the interval that keeps everything alive. The end in Egyptian understanding was never a boundary. It was a quiet curve where motion slowed enough to become invisible. Nothing truly stopped. It only passed beyond immediate perception, continuing elsewhere in altered form. Egyptian mythology closes not with resolution, but with release and easing of attention, a willingness to let the universe continue without supervision. This final posture is not surrender to darkness, but trust in continuity deeper than awareness. Traveller after gods have spoken, cycles, repeated worlds, balanced and unbalanced again. What remains is not knowledge, but orientation. The Egyptians did not seek to master the cosmos. They sought to live in rhythm with it. Their myths guide the listener not toward answers, but toward a stance of calm participation. When effort ends, alignment remains. When explanation fades, pattern persists. Modern science arrives at a similar humility. The more deeply we measure reality, the clearer its limits become. Models approximate, theories revise, certainty narrows, yet the universe continues uninterrupted. Egyptian mythology anticipated this condition without anxiety. It accepted that understanding would always trail behind process. Meaning did not depend on comprehension. Existence did not require permission. Listener, the final lesson of Egyptian mythology is not about gods or afterlife or cosmic order alone. It is about letting systems function as they were designed to function. The sun does not need encouragement to rise. The earth does not need reassurance to turn. Sleep does not need instruction once resistance fades. The universe carries itself. I think of ancient temples now silent, their rituals ended, their gods unworshipped, yet still standing. Stone remembers alignment long after belief disappears. This is not failure, it is completion. Structures fulfilled their purpose and were released. What mattered moved on, diffused into memory symbol influence. Egyptian mythology survives because it was never dependent on constant attention. Observer endings frighten only when we believe something essential is being taken away. Egyptian thought dissolves this fear by reframing endings as redistribution. Power withdraws but does not vanish. Identity transforms but does not dissolve. Presence shifts scale. The personal gives way to the systemic, the local to the cosmic. Nothing is wasted. Sleep mirrors this truth precisely. Consciousness loosens its grip, not to disappear, but to reconfigure. You will not witness the process. That is part of its effectiveness. Egyptian mythology respects this invisibility. Transformation happens off-stage. The universe works best when not observed too closely. As awareness softens, distinctions lose urgency. Past and future blur. Thought thins into sensation. Breath becomes rhythm rather than effort. This is where Egyptian myth leaves you, not with instruction but with permission to stop listening. Silence completes what narrative began. Traveller, there is no requirement to remember every symbol or sequence. Meaning has already done its work. Like sediment settling after flood, understanding arranges itself quietly. What remains conscious will fade. What matters will stay. In the end, the Egyptians did not fear the night sky closing over them. They trusted it to reopen. They did not fear the tombs sealing shut. They trusted transformation to proceed. They did not fear silence. They recognized it as the universe thinking. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only observed. Some truths do not need to be held, only entered. You are not lost in space. You are part of it. Tonight the universe whispers again, not asking for attention, only acceptance. Sleep, traveller. The cosmos will keep watch. We've reached the quiet edge of tonight's journey, traveller, where the last echoes of ancient voices fade back into stone and starlight. We've drifted together along the Nile's forgotten banks, through temples worn smooth by time, across myths shaped by flood and fire, and into a worldview that once held the universe in careful balance. Now the lantern light dims, not because the story is finished, but because it no longer needs to speak. Egyptian mythology never truly ends. Like gravity, it continues unseen, shaping thought, long after attention moves elsewhere. The past does not close itself. It settles waiting. Beneath layers of sand and centuries of silence, memory still exerts its pull, reminding us that time is not a straight line, but a slow orbit around recurring questions. Who are we in a universe so vast? What survives us? And what listens when we fall quiet? There is no fear here, only scale. We are small, yes, but not insignificant. Like a grain of dust caught in sunlight, our brief presence still belongs to the cosmos that formed it. Some truths do not ask to be solved. They ask to be witnessed, then released. As this chapter rests, allow your thoughts to loosen their grip. Let wonder remain without effort. Let silence finish what words began. The universe does not require your attention to continue its work, but it welcomes your stillness. Rest well, traveller. The story does not end here. It simply returns to waiting. The universe will keep watch.